Okay, so I've decided to do a more in-depth overview of my armature. So, as I've said, it's made from brass tubing, earring studs, bike chain links, some aluminium wire, and Meccano screws. And I think that's it. Plus I've got a block of steel in the middle here, which is a bit heavy, and I probably should have used aluminium, to be honest. But let's start at the feet, work my way up. On the feet, I've just got two of the smaller bike chain links, which I soldered to a half a rod and a ball, which is in there, so that they can pivot in my ball and socket joint. For the shim, I've made the simplest ball and socket joint I could make out of bike chains. So I've just got 4 of the larger bike chains with the 2 balls sandwiched between them, and I have a Meccano screw in the middle. So you can see, here's one ball and there's the other. That ball is connected to the foot right there. So with the tie downs on the feet, I've got my screw that I've filed down to a rectangular shape, which will then go through the foot that way, twist, and then I'll tighten a knot on the back, and it will hold the puppet down. Then I can undo the knot, twist it again, and pull it out, take another step, or do whatever I need. So that joint's really simple. It's just screws and bike chains. No soldering, no nothing, no drilling, no anything. Then I've got the knee, which is again just a ball joint, and that then comes up here. That's a full-sized rod. Don't remember the size exactly, but that's the full length of the rod. And I've soldered it to another bit of bike chain, and then that bike chain then connects to another ball and socket joint. So you can see how I've got right in here. I'll use this actually, it's easier. I've got one chain here, and then this screw that goes down here is connecting these 3 plates together. So this is where the rod is connected to, this plate here, and that plate's sandwiched between these 2 plates. Now you could use, say, a washer or anything else that's circular, and solder the rod to that, or anything else with a circular hole. You could even make something just out of scrap metal, but in my case the bike chain seemed to work very well. And this also allows me to, if I unscrew this a bit here, it allows me to give him slightly different stances, so I can make his stance really wide there, or I can pull it in and make it like that, which is what I'm using at the moment. So, happy accident, that worked out really well. Then for this hip joint, this is my problematic joint area, number 1, because when you twist the hip this way, it's trying to unthread the ball. So what I ended up doing was just soldering it, and then soldering again, and then breaking it, then soldering it again, and breaking it. A lot of destructive tests, but it's staying reasonably well put at the moment, and you can see it's really sturdy. I can hold him from his foot like that, and he's not moving anywhere. So it does its job. Then for the pelvis, I've got 3 of these bits of brass tubing soldered together, which I also had trouble on for some time. I ended up sticky taping it, You could also use wire, but in my case sticky tape worked a bit better. The only problem with tape is it leaves a residue when you heat up the metal, so just got to clean that off, not too big of a deal. And the reason I used the 3 plates is that I could easily sandwich a perpendicular rod coming up from it. So that's working incredibly well. I mean, no problems whatsoever, which is surprising for something that tacky, I guess you could call it. Just remember, with soldering, you need 3 things. You need mechanically clean surface, a chemically clean surface, and you need heat. Lots of heat. So mechanically clean, you got to make sure it's all, polished up, shined up, or else you'll get something like this. See, here I forgot to sand all the mill scale off the bike chain, and it just blobbed up compared to the one where I remembered, and it's flowed out really nicely. I mean, I've managed to keep this on because the bike chain was pretty worn out, so a lot of the mill scale was already off it, so that's actually reasonably strong. But a lot of my other joints had failed because I forgot to clean them with sandpaper. So you got to clean off all the rust, all the residue, and then you got to chemically clean it with flux. And that's a very, very important step. And to solder this stuff, I used some metal solder, which has been working well enough, I guess. It's not the strongest stuff, but at least it sticks to everything. I mean, I've been able to glue brass to steel without any trouble, and solder brass to steel without any trouble, and it's just that, that's working out well. What else? So yeah, and then heat. With this job in particular, too much heat ended up being a big problem when I was first trying to figure out how to solder this. I was getting the ball bearings to cherry red hot, and the solder just wasn't sticking. And I figured out after that the optimal time to solder is a bit after in my case at least, a bit after the flux starts bubbling. So I've heard when the flux starts bubbling, but in my case it still wasn't sticking, so a bit after the flux started bubbling, I started to solder, and that's worked out well enough for me. So we've got this rod coming up here that connects to, I'll just extend them out, that connects to another ball. So I've got a rod going down in there, inside the brass tube, and then it comes to a ball here. Now this is one of the standard, well, what you'd think, what in any other armature would be a standard ball and socket joint, where you've just got 2 plates, 2 holes, and a hole for the screw. The problem with bike chains making these sort of joints, the reason I've only got 2 of them, one here and one up here, is because it's incredibly hard to drill the steel. It's just so bloody hard, and I've tried annealing it and it didn't do anything. So that was a problem. That's why I've only got 2 of those, and the rest of them I've kind of cheated, which has worked out well. But with my armature, I accidentally made them way too big, or way too long. So what I've been able to do is actually squash them just like that, and that makes them a bit more pudgy. Whoops, on the way, which I like, and it also allows them to squash and stretch for things like jumps. So I could have them jump up, stretch, come back down, and squash a bit, which will give them a lot more weight. So that joint's working out really well. I've tried to make, I think, 4 of these kind of joints, and out of the 4 I only got 2 that were good enough, because it's just so hard to drill them in the center. If you don't drill them in the center, then you get, what's the word? They tend to wander, I guess. I can't think of the proper word. But the balls just don't stay in the right place, and they're not the right, they're not tensioned the same. So everything just goes wrong from there. But this socket actually worked out reasonably well. And then I've got the metal plate, and again this was steel, which was a stupid idea, but it's all I had. I didn't have any aluminium. So the problem with steel, or at least the problem I was having, is again it's hard to work with, it's hard to drill, it's hard to cut, so I ended up just cutting a really square bit out of my stock. If you're interested, it's actually 1084 steel that I was intending to use for knives, but I haven't got around to it yet. So that's what that is, and instead of drilling it, what I did, this is going to sound really crude, but it's working out well, is I actually put 2 little bits of brass as support, and I epoxied it, and then superglued over the epoxy, then epoxied, then superglued, and then put a bunch of layers of epoxy and superglue, and it is incredibly strong. Did the same thing up here, just a lot more, so you can see that's actually built up. And if you feel it, it feels like, I don't know, it feels like stone. It's literally rock hard. And then these support bits of brass that run down here, they also serve another purpose. They allow me to put this little piece of brass that I made into these bits of square stock. Now that square stock's actually a little thinner, that's why it fits in there perfectly, and that gives me a nice rigging point, so you can do like Superman stuff, and you can jump, and you can, you know, fly and fall, and anything I want him to do in the air. So that's great. Then up to the chest, or the torso, or above the chest, I don't know. Did the same thing up here with the glue and the epoxy, and it's holding out incredibly well compared to if I say solder it. Now here I've got 2 of the smaller chain links. That one was just to connect it to the chest, and this one is to connect the neck. And then I've got another one of these standard ball and socket joints. Now the problem with my design, this was entirely my fault, is the way I designed it. This is the front. The way I designed it, he couldn't move his arms forward and backwards, so for things like walks, all the movement was here, which works out well enough, but then in one of my scenes I need to have him getting up from the ground, so his arms would need to be back a bit. So what I did is I cut some notches out, right here, and here. I cut some notches out, so what I can do is I can move that arm down to there and pull it back. Then it goes through that. And that's working out okay. And as you can see, I don't know if you noticed, I'm having some problems with chatter here. That's just super glue. I super glued this ball joint in because I was just messing around and I needed to see if it worked, and it's not working out too well. So I'm gonna need to change that up. That's why it's a bit chattery there. Anyway, then we go back to the arms, and we come out here, and I've got another ball joint, and the arms are done pretty much the same way as the legs up until the knee or the elbow joint. So it's exactly the same. I've got, say this is the hip joint, I've got, you know, a rod coming out here, and then I've got a ball there, so that's double ball and socket joint. And what I did there is, because my rods were slightly too long, I had to cut them down, put them into some more, some brass tubing, and then solder the brass tubing. So as you can see, that's how long the rods normally are, and I needed a bit shorter or else my guy's shoulder width would have been massive. And it already is. I mean, I still didn't shorten it enough. But that's working out okay. It fell off a few times in my destructive testing, but it's holding up pretty nice now. So you can see I've got all the movement there, all the movement here. I can move the shoulders up and down for more expressive sort of movements. And then the arms, you'll notice that they're wire. Let me just tighten this. So the arms are made, oops, turn around so it's fun again. The arms are made of wire, and the reason for that is because I really, really did not want to make I could get away without a toe joint for the feet, but I really, really didn't want to make like wrist joints and finger joints or anything like that, so I just decided to make it out of wire. So what I've done is where the leg would connect to this rod here, I've switched it out for a bit of the thinner square brass stock, and I have only soldered it. This was another happy accident. You'll notice I've only soldered it up here. I'll put this half of the bike chain. So when I push the larger rod onto it, it actually gets squeezed between the bike chain and the smaller square brass tubing. And with the hand, what I've done is I've come in with 2 wires. One of the wires has gone into the tube, and I used my bench vise to squash the tube over the wire so that it held it in place, and then I just wrapped the excess of the other wire around the tubing. So then that slides incredibly snugly, onto there, and that's not coming off. So what I'm going to do with that is I am going to cast the silicone over the wire, and if the wire breaks, then I can just remove the hand, remove the wire, make a new one of these, cast a new hand, and then slot it right back on. That's if the wire breaks. It's only a very short film, so I don't know if it's going to break, but hopefully it doesn't. And then we've got the head, and now I made a